Hello and welcome to the Walk Around podcast, powered by JM&A Group. If you are in the automotive retail space, you have found the right podcast for you. I am one of your hosts, Mark Spoto, joined by my second time co-host, Jonathan Jordan. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mark.
You returned.
Yeah, I made it.
You made it. You made the cut.
You know,
amazing.
We'll see if I get another one.
So today, we were fortunate to have Cliff Banks. And if you don't know Cliff Banks, you're obviously not paying attention to automotive news and content out there because he is prolific. 32 years in automotive retail, most of which was spent as a journalist, as an editor, as a trainer. He's built a network of relationships, which has enabled him to do two main things. He's got the Banks Report, which is industry overview of topics and trends going on, in particular around buy, sells, and mergers and acquisitions. And then he's got AUTOVATE, a conference where dealers come together and talk about trends and insights in the industry. And Jonathan, I thought Cliff really did an amazing job talking to us about where things are going, what's on the mind of dealers, and just sort of the overall landscape of where we are right now.
Yeah, I agree. He's got a really unique perspective, unique background. It was fun to kind of hear about how he, got to where he is today. But the conversation we had around vendors and how dealers should go through the selection process and automotive technology was really insightful.
Yeah, all of those things are on the topics, or on the minds of dealers right now. So this will be a good conversation for you to hear. And we brought back Best Bets. Despite your recommendation not to, I decided to bring it back, and it was a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely an improvement.
Okay.
I don't know if we're there yet.
Thank you.
But an improvement. So let us know what you think.
Praise from Jonathan is not easy, so I take that with a great amount of pride. Without further ado, enjoy the walk around with Cliff Banks. Well, we are thrilled to have Cliff Banks join us on the walk around. When you hear the name Cliff Banks, you immediately think industry insider. And Cliff, we're so thrilled to have you with us. Thank you for joining.
Well, it's great to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's jump in. I'm not sure everyone knows your background. You've put out so much content. You share so many insights about what's going on in the business. But I'm not sure a lot of people know you got your start, obviously, or maybe not obviously for most, you got your start as a journalist.
Well, in a manner of speaking, yeah, I say I've got about 34 years in the automotive retail space. I started with a training company out of Dearborn in 1990, doing new vehicle launches and dealership training for the OEMs. Was there for 5 or so years, and then over time parlayed that into a position at WardsAuto. Ended up as an assistant editor on the dealer magazine, and over my 10 years there, ended up as an editorial director running the retail products, conferences, all the newsletters, our magazine, serving on the Ward's 10 Best Engines panel a couple of years, which was a real treat, being able to drive those cars, the new cars before they hit the market. But yeah, so I got my start there, and then I did a stint with Dealer Magazine, running dealer communications for about 2 years before launching the Banks Report. So, and then from there, still have the Banks Report, but then launched AUTOVATE in 2016, which was our conference, annual conference that we put on. So yeah, I'd say close to 25 years as an editor. I'm just a guy now that's been around a long time with some gray hair to show for it, who actually stuck with. Yeah, and I stuck with the retail place. And you see with a lot of these publications, the reporters, are in for 2 or 3 years. They do their duty or whatever, learn the ropes, on the retail side. They're covering dealers, and then they move on to OEMs or suppliers or elsewhere. But I really wanted to stay with the retail side of the business. I just think that's where all the action is, to be honest with you. I mean, and you're covering, Main Street, small business owners to large global corporations, and just a lot of, including the politics, the economics, and of that. And it's just, to me, has been the most fascinating part of the auto industry to cover.
So it's interesting, Cliff, when you think about kind of the state of how our business or how our industry is covered, you've got some really dominant content and journalism providers, Automotive News, you mentioned Wards, but now you're starting to see a lot more, I guess, non-traditional sources. AUTOVATE, our friends at Car Dealership Guy.
Right.
You have a podcast. I like to think we are purveyors of content and information. What's your perspective on the state of journalism?
That's a great question. I've got a lot of thoughts, and I'm not, and they're evolving, to be honest with you. And it's not just automotive; it's across the board. One of the reasons I went out and left Wards actually was to create the Banks Report. I at the time, we were owned by two private equity firms, and we were going through the Great Recession in automotive, and media was getting hammered. Layoffs galore across both trade publishing and consumer publishing. Media was really evolving just because of the internet. Advertising was changing, if not going away. And I had that conversation with myself. I was getting close to 40, and I thought, I don't want some young kid in a cubicle in Manhattan working for one of these private equity firms, looking at a spreadsheet and seeing my salary. And, and I was up there. I was doing pretty well at Wards. And I thought, I'm going to have a target on my back. And I'm not going to let some kid dictate my career path for me. And I looked too. I said, I thought, look, I'm going to be doing the same thing that I'm doing today. I'm going to be doing that 20 years from now. Time to cut bait and figure out if I can do this on my own. It took a while to find a partner. And I did, after Dealer Magazine, then I found a partner to help finance and launch the Banks Report. He died within the first year, sadly. So I'm not sure how we survived. But look, I was trying to build a subscription business, one subscription at a time, doing something that really no one had done before. And so I feel like I was one of the pioneers in this new media style. And I created several obstacles for myself. I'm my own worst enemy. I don't like a lot of the shock advertising or marketing or look at me marketing. I just put the content out there and let it stand for itself. And if you want it, you can buy it. If not, move on. But fortunately, I had a little bit of a good reputation from my previous years. Today, I got to tell you, I look at guys like Paul Daly. I look at Mr. Yossi there in Philly with his the car dealership guy. I look at some of these others, and I got to tell you, they bring so much energy to this business and a new way of looking at things. I think Levi has built. He's built such an incredible audience. These guys are working their tails off and bringing a lot of good to the business.
Yeah, it's good to have new perspectives, right?
Yeah. But listen, the media across the board is going through a huge transition today. And some of the old rules, some of the gatekeepers, so to speak, and I considered myself as one of the gatekeepers early on, to where, we controlled. I'll admit, I helped control the content dealers saw in the industry, what the industry saw. Today, anyone can produce content now. On LinkedIn, you can create a blog, and you do podcasts, as we see, and I'm no podcast expert, believe me. I'm learning very slowly on how to do it.
Same.
Yeah. So, but, I think it's good because what we've seen is a democratization of media. We have people with voices. I look at I look at somebody at those guys, and you mentioned them, but I also look at Jim Ziegler, who's been quote, I mean, listen, he's one of the dinosaurs, but I say that kindly. His Facebook community, which we shouldn't talk about. I mean, he's got a Facebook group, which we don't talk about, but I'm going to mention is that mainly dealers are in it, but it is the most effective social media platform. His group, it's private, that I've ever seen in social media. And he built that very early on and puts out columns, and not everyone's going to like his take. And I get that. And there are others now that we've seen move on to creating newsletters that aren't in automotive, but across the board in media. So I think it's a great, exciting time. It's also a challenging time because making money is hard.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue.
Yeah. I think, Cliff, want to dive in a little bit to some insights in the industry and kind of what you're seeing out there. I think the last guest we had on the podcast called it the great normalization, and kind of what we're going through right now. Inventories are back up. Front end margins are under pressure, but it's nothing we really haven't seen before.
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
In the past, I don't know that this is new, but something unique that we're seeing right now is front end margins are definitely compressed. We're seeing them half of what they were 12 to 18 months ago.
But they're still higher than what they were pre-pandemic, though.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Still higher there. But one interesting thing we've seen is we saw F&I performance go up significantly throughout the pandemic.
Right.
It trickled down a little bit towards the second half of last year, but we've seen it maintain through this year. So whereas front-end profits are going down, we're seeing F&I kind of hold steady. And I'm just curious if you're seeing some of the same things or kind of any thoughts on that.
Yeah. And a couple points. First, listen, I laughed early on when the automakers during the pandemic and coming out of it talked about maintaining production discipline and pricing discipline. And I mean, we all knew that, anyone that's been around a long time knew that was not going to happen. I mean, it was laughable to hear that kind of talk. Regarding the F&I profits, I think a lot of that is due to, companies like you guys, like JM&A, that have really led the charge in providing training and not just training of dealers of how to present F&I products, but also in a way that is much friendlier to customers, and in a much more honest way than what we would have seen in previous generations. I think dealers that can sell those products the right way can provide value to their customers, despite what we hear in the media. The constant drumbeat of barrage and down, beating down dealers, and I don't think that's the reality. I think the reality is that dealers are, for the most part, are trying to do the right thing, and I think being able to have products and processes in place that are tried and true, and you guys have helped lead that charge over the years.
So, Cliff, you mentioned you've got a very niche audience, but
yes,
you obviously see a lot in the business. You talk to a lot of dealers.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You've got a really broad and unique perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What other things are you hearing? Jonathan mentioned kind of the great normalization, and yet still very healthy industry. Things are coming down a bit.
Right.
What other things do you think are on the minds of dealers?
Yeah. Well, of course, everyone wants to know or understand what that future EV world looks like.
Yes.
And I wrote this 6 years ago now. In 2018, I wrote a column about the uncertainty of the future. It basically said that by this time, in the middle part of this decade, we were really going to be in the throes of just uncertainty that we've never seen before in this industry. And one was because of the EV question. And I mean, that's the question of the generation is where does that end up? And we don't know. For some people, it's settled. I don't think it's settled at all. The consumer is still going to have a lot to say. Another thing that I hear a lot about is the affordability crisis, and it is certainly an issue. But I was with the Canadian auto dealers in Toronto at their summit in March, and they asked me about that question, and I just thinking about it, we're still, but in May we had a 16 million SAR. I think if interest rates were lower, we'd probably be pushing a 17 million or 16 and a half, probably. Right. Mm-hmm. Look, but pre-pandemic, it was 17 million. People
demand
are buying
is still
cars.
high. In other words, demand is still high.
Yeah, right? People are still buying cars. And right. I don't, and we're doing that. We've been hitting that with a very limited incentive-based push. Interest rates are high. And we're still where we, getting to where we were pre-pandemic. So I guess I don't know. Look, wealth has increased also. Someone did a study of our debt, national debt. But when you look at it as a percentage of GDP, from 50 years ago, the percentages are pretty much in line. So, yeah. So
you're optimistic about.
Well, I am. I suspect that 10 years from now, we'll be talking about a lot of the same things that we're talking about today. I think the vendors will still be the same. I think, we'll still see, you guys will see Cox Automotive, CDK, Reynolds, Techion will probably be much more, a much more firmer ground, I think.
Yeah. When I say you brought that up. We have a question on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Around vendors.
Yeah. So let's talk about automotive technology.
Okay, sure.
Bit. I know you certainly have some views into that space. And if we look over the last, I don't know how many years, but there have been countless vendors who have come into the market, come to dealers and said, we're going to take care of the whole transaction. We're going to provide an end-to-end solution where you only need one tool. And I think we'd all agree we're not there by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
The transactions, still very fragmented. And it seems like a lot of the innovation that's happening out there is coming from these small startup companies where they're solving one piece of the transaction. And so it seems like we're almost destined to have this fragmented process for quite some time. Do you see a world where it is completely end to end, or do you think we're going to continue to have multiple players?
Well, I'm going to say this. I hope we don't get to that world.
Interesting.
I hope we don't.
Why?
It's be careful what you wish for. I think the only way we get to that world is if we start seeing the destruction of the whole retail system that we know and distribution system that we see today. You're not going to get we're not going to get there unless one or two, 2 or 3 large entities come in and take control over the whole space. I look at this industry, we still have 18,000 different rooftops owned by approximately 8,000 different owners. You've got over 1,000 different, probably more, vendors. A lot of them are small businesses. A lot of them are startups that, I think of, some of the people over the years that I've covered that have created phenomenal companies and have gone on, with exits that have given them, transformed their lives, just from a wealth perspective, but also helped transform the industry. You think of the whole, I was around, when the inventory management tools took off, and, we had AAX, and then Dale Pollock came along, basically second or third, but he became a great defender or apologist or evangelist for these tools, and that changed the industry. For good or bad, but it changed the industry, and I think for good. It brought more technology. I don't know that we get there with having more, 2 or 3 players. And I'll tell you, we've seen we've seen different players that have come in and looked at this space over the years. SAP came in, that they almost did a deal with one of the large DMS vendors, did not, and then backed off. I think the relative number of dealerships, 18,000 dealerships, causes a lot of the big players to think twice. But I will tell you this, at some point, I've got to think that, when you start looking at whether you call it a software-defined vehicle or a connected vehicle, for us to get to this true holy grail of customer experience, you really are going to need a much different perspective, both from dealers and OEMs regarding data. And at some point, an Amazon, NVIDIA, or Qualcomm, one of these larger companies is really going to, I think, create a pipeline of data that's going to allow, let's say I'll take me for example, and I've been using this example for probably 4 years now, but I get into my car and it talks to me. So these large language models, are tied into the vehicle diagnostics. And we're already seeing it with Mercedes, with some mapping and infotainment related stuff. But when you start tying that into and integrating that into the actual vehicle diagnostics and the actual vehicle systems, if that's possible from a cybersecurity issue, I don't know.
So who do you think leads that space?
Well, I don't know that we're there yet. I don't think we're even close to that yet. I don't think anyone's really looking at that yet. And I've shared that thesis with some companies, Amazon a couple times, but with some of the OEMs. But think about that. If my car is telling me verbally, "Hey, Cliff, in 2 months you're going to need new front brakes," and ABC Motors has a slot open at 5:30 p.m. because it knows my calendar, it knows it's integrated into the dealership service scheduler, and knows the parts. So if the part's not there, it's able to automatically order the part from the supplier and coordinate the shipping to the, with the shipping company to make sure the part is there on time, and then lets me choose which loaner vehicle I want. I mean, now you're talking about some real wow, gee whiz stuff. But,
and that's not that crazy of an idea, right?
No.
But the challenge is there's so many processes, systems involved in that statement you just made.
Yeah.
Who's going to be the first to solve that? I think is the question.
Right. And I think the DMS vendors probably, I think the future for them, the connected vehicle probably represents more of a danger or a threat to them than anything else. Because once the OEMs start building out their data platforms, using the data from the connected vehicles, I mean, they're going to have all the customer data. They're going to have everything. So, and I've been urging, the DMS vendors, like CDK with Fortellis, I think this is part of their play, but Reynolds, Cox has put their foot in the water here, but they have to create, I think, data platforms that are going to serve the dealers' needs and make sure the dealers' interests are protected also. And they understand that. But again, the manufacturers have a lot to say and have a lot of work to do in this space before they get there. I mean, a ton of work. And then the dealer, and part of that work includes building that trust with the dealership body. And that's, if you're one of the domestic brands, you're having trouble right now with that.
So Cliff, I want to go back to what you mentioned regarding vendors.
Yeah.
Right? And you said there's thousands of them.
Sure.
And if you were to put on your dealer hat, how do you go about identifying the right vendor for your business? You have a great conference that you put together in AUTOVATE. There's NADA. Dealers are getting pitched constantly. What's your advice to dealers on selecting the right vendor, identifying the right partner? What What are some tips that you may have?
I think you have to look at your organization and see what your people are most comfortable with. If you can get in on the ground floor with a startup, with a vendor, and really dictate or help guide, dictate's the wrong word, but guide the strategy and product development, then with them as a partner, I think that's pretty cool. Change for change's sake is hard, especially with companies that are that provide a lot of solutions. I mean, if you're using a DMS, I mean, man, you got to really think long and hard if you want to make that switch. Sometimes the DMS you're with is the best one you've got, and switching is to me, it's a huge risk. But I think overall you want to look at the team at the vendor level, who you're dealing with. What is their perspective or their approach? Number one, I mean, are they team oriented, or are they just looking to get your money? Mm-hmm. And again, that can change year after year. I mean, you could have. It's just like going into a dealership on a car. I could have a great experience with one salesperson and have a terrible experience the next day with another. So it's the same with a dealer, using a vendor. My rep could be the best person on the earth, and then if that person moves on or is moved to a different position, the next person up could be the worst. I mean, it's such a people business. Number one, I think you really have to look at that. I think secondly, you have to look at your team. I had a dealer asking me, the large dealer group, and I say large, probably 15 store group, reached out to me several years ago and was looking to change DMS, the vendor. And I asked him why. And he said, well, my CFO is kind of pushing for it. Was pushing for this one. And I said, yeah, I mean, well, is your organization or your team, your employees the type to roll up their sleeves and take on a challenge, or are they going to sit back and grumble because it's not what they're used to? I mean, you have to look at that. I said, are there any people pushing against that? And he says, yeah, the general manager of my most profitable store wants to keep what we've got. And he had, the CFO had been there for 2 years. And I said, as part of his pay plan based on saving money? He goes, yeah. And I said, well, you have a decision to make. Do you want to lose your CFO or do you want to lose your GM? Take your pick. He ended up staying with what he had. So those are the unique dynamics in this space that you have to look at. And I think too, another question you got to look at, is the company looking to, are the founders looking to build a company to sell it? Because I'll tell you, once you sell that company, the whole, your whole dynamic changes. It may not happen right away, but it will happen over time to where, the new owners are going to dictate culture and how the company operates. So, sometimes it's a marriage made in heaven, other times it isn't. So there's so many.
It sounds like there's some key takeaways. Obviously focusing on your people is one. Yeah. Making sure everyone involved is aligned on the goals of why you need a particular service or a technology. Right. And then doing some research and then making sure that company that you're looking at is in it for the long term and not of a short term type of play.
Yeah, I think the change management piece is sometimes something that dealers, vendors don't spend enough time really thinking about. Yeah. Like, what does change really look like, and what is the cost of that change? And not necessarily just dollars and cents, but the time, the people, the everything that has to be involved, and really take that into account.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's interesting because I have relationships with many of the CEOs and senior management, and there are times when a dealer has, numerous times dealers have reached out to me because of a problem they can't get through to the top, or they can't get a problem solved at a vendor, and I'll offer to make a call or send an email for them, and it gets solved pretty quickly. So I would suggest trying to develop relationships with senior leadership.
Well, on that topic, Cliff, I'm glad you brought up. That's your second great segue
Yeah.
of the conversation.
Yeah, it's like you knew our plan.
It's almost like you're a pro at this. Relationships matter, obviously.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
one of the ways that a lot of people, build relationships or create relationships is at events and conferences.
Yeah, yes.
And obviously,
Yes.
you are behind one of the biggest in AUTOVATE. So talk a little bit about AUTOVATE. Why is that different from some of the other events? And why is it a benefit for both the vendor and the dealer?
Well, when I was at Wards, we created for a couple of years something called the Spring Training Event. We did it in Tampa, in Florida. This was 2008 and 2009. Great time to start an event. And we did it in conjunction with the New York Yankees, where we went to the Yankees spring training facility and had dinner and a party there, and we worked with the Yankees on that. I always liked unique environments and not creating the typical ballroom conference experience where you sit down and listen to PowerPoint presentations all day.
Right.
When I launched AUTOVATE, it was really predicated on no presentations other than from one or two analysts that I bring in, handpicked to bring in. So it really, and not a knock against vendors, but no vendor presentations or sales pitches. It was more year-end created for CEOs, senior execs at these companies to get an idea of what is coming down the pike in the automotive space, get a look at some new and innovative technologies, hear from the investment firms where the smart money is going, hear from some of the investment bankers in terms of, what's changing in the space or how to structure deals properly, and create an environment that fosters relationship building. So we have, a couple cool receptions, a couple really cool after parties, and it's a real conversational, informal, I say informal, environment. I control the conversation. I mean, so, I learned early on not to give people the microphone in the audience. You lose control real quickly sometimes with that. So people text me their questions as I'm on stage, and it was funny. We were talking this past year, the opening reception at the first evening, and I was staying there with one of the founders who was going to be on stage the next day, and someone asked him, "Hey, have you gotten your questions from Cliff yet?" And he laughed and said, "No, we haven't even talked about it." But he said, "I can guarantee you, Cliff doesn't even know what he's going to ask yet."
But that's good, because sometimes these staged interviews, it just feels forced, and you don't really learn from those conversations.
I do a ton of reading. I spend so much time reading, hours and hours of reading about everyone who's on stage, companies, the backgrounds, everything I get my hands on. So I have it. It's in my mind, and I've been stewing over it, thinking about it, meditating on it. And then and I tell some of the bigger CEOs of some of the bigger firms, look, I said, look, you're a big boy, you're big, you're whatever. Expect some hard questions. I'll ask them respectfully, but we'll ask some tough questions. And I think it goes to both of our credibility to do that. I won't tell them which one, what they're going to get. They can guess. I mean, I'm sure. But I listen. Look, last year, we asked Chris Walsh from Reynolds about the whole data strategy with Reynolds, and it's still, and he tackled that question head on and answered it forthrightly and honestly and didn't back down. Brian McDonald from CDK the year before, and the JM from Techion, both answered tough questions, and it's to their credit, that I think that they're able to sit on stage and be able to take those kinds of questions. I think I just try to provide great value, and It's sometimes behind the scenes, you guys know. I mean, these things look like, it's helter skelter, everything's on fire and then it comes together, I mean, but yeah, we got some funny
never.
stories,
Exactly as you plan.
Yeah.
You think it's time for our last segment?
Or
do you have one more?
I'm not ready for that.
You're not
yet.
ready. You got one more. Okay.
All right.
John,
Bring it on, guys.
Cliff, what are we not talking about as an industry that we should be talking about?
Oh, that's not fair. I asked that question of everyone. I think honestly, what I was alluding to before. I mean, the impact that the software-defined vehicle is going to have. What impact is that going to have on the retail space? Look, we're all and I'm not talking about autonomous. I was just in Princeton last week at a conference on autonomous driving. But no, I think it's not necessarily self-driving. It's more just software-defined and what role the dealer is going to have in that. How is that going to change and impact the relationship with the customer? And it's not going to be, one single aha moment. I think it's going to be an evolution over time. But it's almost like that proverbial frog in the boiling water scenario. I think we need, and the dealers are already, I think, onto it. I wrote in 2016 2 columns about this and about the potential impact of over-the-air updates on service departments. And Mercedes negotiated 2 or 3 years ago now. I mean, it's been a while now. Negotiated I think it was a 5-year deal with Mercedes on getting part of that revenue. And you have other manufacturers and other dealers, brands that are having those same conversations. So I think it's things like that. We just have to, as an industry, stay on top of that and make sure the dealer has a seat at that table and in those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot on this podcast over the past few months and episodes about customer experience and certainly data and how they are connected to the sale, and then the post-sale follow-up is going to be crucial.
Yes, yeah, and listen, if you can, I'll tell you what. If my car is telling me it needs new front brakes, I think and we're almost there now. Your cars are the monitoring systems tell you when the tires are flat, how long. The oil life is, what sensors are going bad. I mean, so we're getting there, and that's on the screen. But once you employ the LLM AI model to that, then that becomes even more, wow, the wow factor.
All right, so Cliff, you mentioned a little bit about spring training and the Yankees.
Yeah.
I think you're going to like this next segment.
Right.
Jonathan is still on the fence. We tried it with our previous guest. Let's just say we have a lot to learn.
It was a little rough.
It was rough.
I'm
ready.
All
right, so we are calling this best bets. Okay.
Sure.
I may dabble a little bit in the sports wagering side of things. It's very popular now, Cliff.
Yeah.
20 plus years ago, it was kind of the underbelly of society. Now we're a little bit out and open and having fun with. No offense to anyone who's gambling. I was gambling 20 years ago, so please. All right, so best bets. I'm going to throw out a couple of things at you.
Yeah, sure.
And you're going to tell me, are you putting your money on that?
Okay.
And Jonathan, please jump in along the way.
All
right, so you talked about EVs. There's obviously been a lot of talk about consumer adoption, right? Price as a barrier, fears over, road or battery range and anxiety around that. And we just saw a Wall Street Journal article not too long ago talking about the software and the technology in EVs may be a barrier, that people are a little bit longing for the older days of buttons and switches as opposed to touch screens. But anyway, EVs are certainly something that is not going away. Adoption will be a moving target. If you were to put your money on Tesla forever owning market share around EV. They will never relinquish their grip on EV market share. Are you putting your money on that? Is that a best bet?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
All right.
Look how quick
that was quick.
Cliff was to answer that. Why are you not putting your money on Tesla owning EV market share?
Well, they're already losing market share significantly. Right. I mean, as more entrants come into the market, so much of and I, my friend Glenn Mercer, who's a regular at AUTOVATE, talks about this. Market share is really a product of or a result of the cadence of refreshing vehicles. And, the longer you go without a refresh or a new product, the longer, the more your market share is going to erode. And Tesla has actually not done very well in terms of refreshing your vehicles. Now, having said that, to be fair, we might need to adjust our definition of refreshing because they obviously refresh their vehicles every time with a new software update.
Right.
Which is
styling
but the styling is the question. And you start seeing some of these new EVs. I saw Toyota's new EV yesterday, SUV, and starting my son the basketball practice and had him snap a couple pictures. It was the first one I'd seen on the road. That thing looked sharp. I think, and I think some of these new designs are phenomenal. So,
Jonathan, you are a new EV owner.
I am.
What do you have?
We're breaking news for the world out there. Jonathan was so resistant for years to EV, and now he's a driver. Tell us.
I am. I just took delivery of a BZ4X. Sounds like the car.
Yeah, that's what we saw. Yeah, that's what we saw yesterday.
So far, so good.
What do you think?
It's good. It's quick. I was a little worried about the charging aspect of it. Yeah. But
you're in South Florida. You don't have anything to worry about that.
Yeah. I go to the office. I go to the airport. That's about it. So it's been good so far.
All right. So, Cliff, you're not betting on Tesla. We got that one. Let's move on to the next one. Obviously, you follow closely the M&A world and buy sells.
Yes.
I believe that we have not yet seen the peak transaction price. Are you putting money on that?
Well, Mark, let's put a time frame on that.
Okay, you want to put a time frame?
Yeah,
fine.
like. Sorry, I'm going to give Mark some feedback in real time here.
Jonathan is always giving me feedback, so it's a gift, Cliff. It is.
So
a gift.
Let's ask that question. Do you think we'll see another record transaction price?
Yeah. Are you putting your money
dealership in the next 5 years? We've seen some really big numbers in the past.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have. Toyota. I mean, certainly Toyota. In your guys' neck of the woods and your guys' family. I think, or Sphere. Hendrickson Toyota was massive.
This is a good one.
Yeah.
I may have stumped the great.
Well, I guess you have to, there may be an outlier or two. There are still some intriguing deals that are out there.
I got to press you, Cliff. Are you putting your money on a record transaction?
Yeah. I think we could see. I would.
All right, he's going in. He's all in on a still a record transaction to come.
Yeah.
All right, last one for you, Cliff. Our crack research team, which consists of Jonathan and I, on LinkedIn, saw that you are a Michigan guy.
I've been here for 34 years. Yeah.
So you're University of Michigan alum?
I wish. I dropped out of college. I'm a three-time college. I tried 3 times. I dropped.
So did Jonathan.
Yes.
So, join the club. Join the club. So
good.
It's all good, Cliff. We're here, right? You're doing
exactly.
Well. You're doing well. All right. So University of Michigan is you're a fan.
Yeah.
Right now, as of the last couple of weeks, ESPN has Michigan winning the national championship at plus 2,500. So obviously things have changed a little bit since last year's
just a little
victory.
Yes.
Where are you putting your money on plus 2,500? Are you going to take a flyer on that?
That's that might be worth a few dollars.
I'll
tell you this. I'll tell you this. I think that would be a dumb bet, but
that's a dumb bet.
But if you win, but listen, if it plays out, then.
All right, I got another one.
Keep going. This is great. I keep going.
Right. You obviously have a new coach, right? Mr. Harbaugh decided to find greener pastures maybe with Los Angeles. And you've got a great coach in Sherrod Moore.
Yes.
Sharon Moore. So over under Mr. Moore's tenure at 3 seasons. Are you going over or under 3 seasons for him to be the head coach?
Yeah. I think he makes it 3 seasons.
3 seasons?
They tend to be loyal. It took a lot to remove the basketball coach this year, Juwan Howard.
Yeah.
It took a lot.
There's not a lot of turnover typically.
No, not really. I mean, I guess we've seen some over the years, but you had to be really bad. You had to be really, really bad. I mean, and not understanding of the Michigan culture. I think he understands what the culture is, and he's hard nosed. I think some of the other guys that we saw short turnovers were.
Will you be rooting for the Los Angeles Chargers now that Harbaugh is there, or are you bitter in his departure?
Oh no, I'm not bitter. I think I think he's a phenomenal coach. I will tell you this. He made a believer out of me. I was starting to doubt seriously, the first few years, and you started looking at the numbers against Ohio State and how bad. I mean, Ohio State had dominated for 7 years. It was unreal. And then I think the last 3 years, he just
he turned it around.
Completely turned it around. So he's always been a great. He's won wherever he's gone, and I suspect he's going to have the Chargers in the next year or two at that championship level. And I hope the best for him. I mean, I think. I think he's great for football. I know there's a lot of detractors.
Well, Cliff, you're a positive guy. You're a positive influence in our industry. We've got a bright future ahead for all of us.
Yes.
And it's an exciting time, and we can't thank you enough for taking your time to join us on the walk around. Thank you, Cliff.
Thanks, Cliff.
Well, thank you, guys. Thanks so much. It was fun.
We appreciate it. We really appreciate you joining us today on the walk around, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. All episodes are brought to you by the JM&A Group, and a special thanks to our team, Caitlin Swanson, James Gahn, and Michaela Gerritsen. We look forward to seeing you next time on the walk around.